All right, we're going to kick this off. I appreciate everybody joining us today. We are recording this webinar, so everybody's going to be able to share it and see it afterward. We will post it on the community. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here before we introduce the people with the knowledge, and then we'll get it rolling. I am going to have the chat turned off for this webinar, but the Q&A is open. So please, as you think of questions throughout this, please feel free to drop them in that Q&A box. We will try to get to all of them at the end. We've scheduled an hour and a half for this. We don't anticipate it taking that long. We're probably going to have about 40 minutes of content or so, engage with some questions, and then we'll wrap up whenever the time is appropriate there. And you can always follow up with any of us with any follow-up questions and see that original research as well that is now in the clearinghouse. So we've got everything set up there. Again, we're recording, and today we're going to be talking about a very interesting study. We had a meeting about this maybe a month ago, I believe it was, and this is a study that was conducted by the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and Responsive Management. If you're not familiar with the regional associations, there are 4 regional associations under the umbrella of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And the Southeastern region covers, 13 states, Brian?
I believe we're at 15, and as well as
15 states.
The territories as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I almost shortchanged the Southeast there. Apologize to those 2 states and the territories that I left out. So we have a study here that focuses on non-hunting sport shooters and firearms owners' attitudes toward the federal aid and wildlife restoration program. And we're going to kick it off talking a little bit about why that study was commissioned and why it's important to the Southeast region in particular. And to do that, we have Brian Clark, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources and the co-vice chair of the CFA R3 committee. So Brian, I'm going to stop talking and let you kick us off here.
Very good. Thank you so much, Swanny. And I'll be very brief because obviously we want to get to the results, the meat of this presentation, and Mark's going to do a great job of outlining our methodology and the findings, which I think everybody will find very interesting and useful for us going forward. But yeah, the idea for this project originated a few years ago, and Mark and his team and some folks from our committee from the Southeastern had some interest and discussions in researching this topic because of the growing population of recreational shooters and gun owners in the U.S., many of which we know are not hunters, potentially prospective hunters, but so there's a great opportunity here for us in recruitment, retention, reactivation, but also just for the very fact that they're contributing to the federal aid, the wildlife restoration program, and undergirding what we do as state fish and wildlife agencies and together in the broader industry, what we do to deliver opportunities for folks, both for the conservation work we do, which provides the land and the conservation efforts on the ground, but then also shooting ranges that all of our states are involved in one way or another, whether building those, maintaining those, partnering with other entities to provide public shooting opportunities. And so with this increase in gun ownership and people involved in recreational shooting, we really felt it's incumbent on us to understand their awareness of the excise tax they're contributing through gun and ammo purchases, but then also are they aware of what state fish and wildlife agencies and our partners do to provide those opportunities for recreational shooting, for hunting, for conservation, which undergirds these activities and both the land and the wildlife populations. And so we wanted to understand these topics better from those end users' perspectives, the gun owners and the target shooters, so that we can better communicate to them. We know what they understand, what they're aware of, their levels of support for different activities, and then use that information to then develop communications and marketing campaigns, both to provide information to them about opportunities and then also what we're doing, what we're currently doing, again, to help support them and use the dollars that they're investing through the excise tax program. So that's some of the background, and Mark has obviously been a leader at this and his team for a long time in understanding public attitudes, and so it was a natural fit for us to go to responsive management. And once we secured a grant, and we're thankful for the multi-state grant program that provided the funding for this effort. And without further ado, that provides you some background to our interest in it and wanting to, again, better understand this both nationally but also in the Southeast, so we can act on the information and better communicate with these stakeholders about what we're doing and then opportunities available to them. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to you, Swanny, or Mark, and let you take the ball and run with it.
Thanks, Brian. I'll introduce Mark while he's getting his presentation up and ready for us. Mark is the head of responsive management. He's the executive director over there. We've worked with him on a number of projects. They've worked all over the country doing countless studies. And this is another one of those impactful pieces of research that we're really excited to learn about. So Mark Duda, I will turn it over to you if you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Good morning from Virginia here, where it's sort of a cloudy old day, getting cold, but I hope everybody's ready for Christmas. What I'd like to do is give you some specifics on non-hunters and sport shooters, firearm owners' attitudes toward federal aid. Essentially, people who don't hunt but have a gun or sport shoot. And we're going to talk about all of those different groups. A project like this isn't done in isolation. Thank you to CFWA. When I was growing up in the 80s and doing work for CFWA and working for the Florida at the time, the Game and Fish Commission, we called it CFWA, but now it's CFWA. So thank you to the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, especially a lot of people that were involved in this project. Justin Greider was supposed to be here, but he's got COVID, sort of the now leader of the R3 committee. Jennifer Wisniewski, I'm not sure if she's on, but I really want to thank her. She's helped sort of shepherd this, help the funding through, and really get a lot of attention on it. You've heard from Brian. Brian now is, I guess, second in command in Kentucky, and people think of him as a great administrator, but he's really a good human dimensions person, has got some really strong background in that, and he helped out tremendously with the survey instrument and methodology and such. Olivia Harmson, the new CFWA R3 coordinator, and then a committee of just a lot of individuals who weren't just in committee name, but really helped with the design of the survey and how questions were asked and stuff like that. So I really appreciate everybody's involvement with that. So, the fundamental issue here is federal aid. As you all know, a lot of your paychecks come from that. In 1937, legislation was passed that actually diverted a tax that was already being taxed, but was given to the Department of Revenue into the Department of Interior, ultimately the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then distributed to the states. It's the most important funding source that we have right now for wildlife conservation. When it was passed, it was an excise tax primarily on hunters. It was passed through the work of Senator Key Pittman. He's from Nevada, and we're proud of Congressman Willis Robertson, who was a Virginian. And we know the importance of that, upwards of $1.5 billion, last year to state agencies to do really important conservation work. And, some of the things that we've done with that are pretty amazing, from bringing back Rocky Mountain elk, wood duck, turkey. I mean, under 650,000 turkeys around 1900. And today, more than 7 million. Pronghorn antelope. I mean, just tremendous amounts of success when it comes to how those dollars were spent, primarily being derived on the sale of firearms and bows from hunters. But we know that hunting has declined over the years, and since about 1980 or so, it's sort of been holding steady, if you will. A couple of cool things about this chart. First off, this is in, when you see the 16,000, this is in thousands of thousands, but it's really 16 million. But we sort of bounced around between 16 million and 14 million. A little bit of a nice rise here since about 2008 or so. And so, but not the increase that we would like to see in terms of hunters out um, recreational hunting, but also in the funds that it brings in. So we've sort of been bouncing around between 14 million, 16 million or so. There's a longer term decline when it comes to the percentage of Americans who hunt. When you look back at those old national surveys, it's always amazing to see 12%, 11% of Americans hunting. Now it's 4, 5, 6% in various surveys. So keep that number in mind and juxtapose that now to the number of firearms being sold. And you can see the steady trajectory from 2000, sort of what I would call the line of best fit, on a steady course of increase. Some years, election years, more than others, you'll see. But in general, a huge increase in the number of firearms sold. And when you buy a firearm, the salesperson doesn't say, "Are you going to use this for hunting?" You buy a firearm and that's taxed. And so it's an interesting juxtaposition of having sort of stable to declining hunting participation and a pretty magnificent increase in the number of guns sold. We've been doing a study for the National Shooting Sports Foundation since about 2008 on shooting participation. And so I just sort of did a rough addition here. But since we started that, it was 2009 for 2008 data, almost 200 million firearms have entered circulation in the US. And so while you're seeing this individually each year, it's a little bit different than that hunter number because this is cumulative. So an enormous amount of guns being sold and an enormous amount of money being brought in through those sales of guns. And so when you look at it, well, all of a sudden you've got hunters who are buying firearms or contributing to federal aid, but you also have people who do not hunt who are contributing to federal aid. And so it's interesting. We started to pick this up in the first survey. We asked a little bit different, but starting in 2012, you can see sort of that whole idea of, wow, there's people who are contributing in this pool of money to federal aid, and it's going up and up and up as a higher percentage of that pie of people who contribute to federal aid. Whereas on the other side, on that far side here, you can see my cursor, hunting but not target shooting is decreasing. And so it's pretty dramatic in terms of what's happening out there. And the data now is a few years old because as we increase and increase, it's even becoming more and more apparent. Upwards to about 75 to 80% of money being spent now is probably coming from non-hunters to federal aid. And so I've been worried about this for a long time. I mean, this goes back to a paper I published in the Wildlife Professional magazine in 2017 on the growth of sports shooting and what it means for conservation revenue. A most recent study called The Precarious Position of Wildlife Conservation Funding in the United States, where we lay out, sort of exactly what's happening. Now, this paper is about a year and a half old now, too. So as we increase gun sales even more, this disproportionate number of people who are contributing to federal aid is becoming more and more skewed, if you will. Again, probably somewhere between 75 and 80% of funds now are coming from non-hunters into that federal aid pot. And so one of the things that I was afraid of when I started to write these papers and started to talk to professionals about that is this whole idea of, wow, what if legislators come out and they say, well, a lot of that money isn't coming from hunters and wildlife is important to hunters, but that money's coming from gun owners and we've got other issues. We've got issues related to maybe mental health that that money could be better used at. We have issues related to firearms and gun violence and things like that. And so I've been very nervous for probably a decade or so about whether that would happen. And when I first started talking about this, people were like, "Oh, that'll never happen." Well, it has. Now they've been beat, but over the years there have been some real concerns by people. We're seeing that money come from and where that money's going to potential raids on wildlife's money. And so let's take a look at the current situation. We're going to take a little bit of a diversion, but I think some of these numbers are pretty important in terms of gun owners and that type of stuff. And so let's start out with, these are 3 studies that have been done over the past few years, and they all align almost exactly. Responsive Management, my company, Gallup, and Pew Research. And so we're going to take a look at 2 things. We're going to look at that essentially the numbers all come in that about 32% of Americans personally own a firearm. That's not just Responsive Management number. That's not just Pew Research. And these are separate independent studies coming to the exact same conclusion. In terms of households who have a firearm, that number was hovering around 42, 43% for quite a while. And so when we used to talk about these numbers and people would say, "Oh, they're high, they seem high." But again, when you have 3 independent studies all being done scientifically that come to the same thing, you can be pretty confident that these are sort of right on target. Now, that's a couple years ago, but with all of these guns coming in, just recently, within the past few weeks, this was a Harvard NBC poll that, for the first time ever that I've seen, a legitimate poll, showing that over half of American voters, households, say that someone in their household owns a gun. So essentially, we're hovering right around, probably, because this is voters, but right around these, because it's household voters, right around half of American households have a firearm. So today, if you fly somewhere for Christmas, if you drive somewhere, if you take a train, I want to be in your head, and I want you to look out all the households out there and remember that probably around half of those households have a firearm. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. And so the question then is, well, who are these people? And this is from another study. This is that biennial study that we do for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And we estimate that when you look at all of the shooters out there, each year people are leaving the activity, but people are coming in. But about 17%, roughly 1 out of every 5 people who are shooting out there are new shooters. And so that's what that number is there, that's 17%. But that's not across the board. When you look at those new shooters, who are the most likely groups to be new shooters? Black residents, Democrats, Hispanic or Latino, younger individuals, women. Wow, if that's not non-traditional, I don't know what is. I mean, that's an amazing graph. And so I want you to keep that in mind as well. This is a great time for people like me because the new National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation numbers just came out a couple months ago. We sort of saw that there was about 14.3 million hunters out there, according to NORC and the Fish and Wildlife Service. But that new number that they put out in the number of shooters was right about where Responsive Management has been saying. There's about 50 million sport shooters out there over the years. And again, that's pretty cool because some of those older studies, Outdoor Foundation for a while, the NSGA, were saying there were a lot less sport shooters out there. We disagreed completely. And the new NORC numbers, I think, are very trustworthy to show that, around 46 million Americans are participating in sports shooting. So again, keep those numbers in mind. So that's sort of the backdrop to this entire study. Stagnant hunting license sales, participation, increasing in gun sales, and people who sport shoot. So let me just sort of tell you a little bit about what we did. We talked about why this study was conducted, and that is to understand the attitudes and knowledge levels of non-hunting sport shooters and firearm owners. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that definition means, because it's pretty encompassing and there's a lot going on underneath it. But what do they think and know and feel about the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Program? Survey was developed by committee, but in a good way, with responsive management and members of CFWA. It was a scientific, multimodal survey of adult non-hunting sports shooters and firearm owners. If you had hunted in the past 5 years, you were excluded. So while you're looking at these numbers or while you're looking at our report, keep in mind that there are not hunters in there that are active, at least for 5 years or more. Most of the people did not hunt. A majority did not hunt. Some did, but it was more than 5 years ago, and most of them were 10 to 20 to 30 years ago. With a really nice number like that, an N value of almost 3,000, we have a sampling error of about 1.81%. And in general, that whole multimodal method is very, very similar to what the most recent national survey of fishing, hunting, and wildlife associated recreation employed as well. The one thing that we did on this one, because it was a multi-state grant, is we started by stratifying our sample in 4 areas: the Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and West. And we did 500 of these non-hunting sport shooters and gun owners in each of those regions. The part that I'm not really going to talk about because it's a little bit separate, but we have 2 test case studies here, and that is in Texas and Tennessee. And so we did an oversample in those states as well, because the next part of this study is going to be a communications program in those 2 states, in those 2 test states. The data is literally brand new, August and September. So it's really, really recent. Of course, when we do a stratification like that, you don't just put those numbers together. You weight that based on, we based ours on the National Shooting Sports Foundation that we did, because we know what the general areas where people shoot are. So we didn't just put those numbers together. We weighted that data to match exactly the number of sport shooters in each state and each region, if that makes sense. So, wow, this survey says this and this survey says that. And I think it's important. A lot of times people can say, Outdoor Foundation can say there's 25 million or 20 million shooters out there. And it's like, well, how do you get your information? What do you do? How is it good? This survey says 20 million. This says 47 million. And one of the things that I want to sort of share with you very quickly is that while over the past 35 years, we've conducted about 1,200 studies, almost all of those have been on wildlife, natural resource issues, how people relate to the outdoors. But we also have a number of contracts with universities out there that do political polling. We're not political in any way, shape, or form, but we collect data for universities who are predicting elections. In my home state of Virginia, one of our contracts is with the Virginia Commonwealth University, and Governor, actually it was the former Governor Wilder here, who runs that department out of Virginia Commonwealth University. And so in 2020, we were able to predict a couple weeks before the election that Biden would win the state by double digits, we predicted by about 11%. He ended up winning by 10%. And that was with 800 completes across the entire Commonwealth. A year later, you would think, well, if you were a Democrat, you're going to win this state by 10 percentage points. 1 year. Well, we started to do our next series of surveys until the very end, when our surveys were showing that Youngkin was probably going to win that within a percentage point, certainly within sampling error. And indeed, he did win that election. It was close, but he did win that election. And so, again, if people tell you about their surveys, look behind the curtain, open up that hood, and see if they're able to predict elections or if their numbers are coming in that makes sense. Because sort of anybody can ask a question and do a survey, but the question is how close to reality they are. And so I want you to feel comfortable with what it is that we do. So then the issue is, well, what did we cover? And Brian did a great job of sort of telling you what it is that we did. And we did a number of things in terms of survey topics. It was a pretty big survey. It's probably 12 to 13 minutes or so. But we covered the basics. That is the participation in shooting and ownership. And remember that, of course, everybody doesn't meet our criteria. So we had to go back from a general population study and filter down to people who met our criteria. Again, the criteria being that you own a firearm, you sport shoot, and you haven't hunted in the past 5 years. So we wanted to know about general opinions of importance when it comes to conservation issues. We wanted to know their knowledge of fish and wildlife agencies. Do they even know they exist in their efforts and the programs that they have? And then we worked our way into the awareness and knowledge of the federal excise tax. We wanted to know what their priorities of agency efforts were, their opinions of wildlife conservation and involvement with organizations. We wanted to test some messages, since this was a two-part study of doing the research and then developing the communications based on that research. We wanted to know if they used and what their preferences were regarding shooting ranges. I'm not going to get into that today, but Brian had asked to put that in there, and I'm really glad that he did, because there's this whole section that shows how important shooting ranges are and what the amenities are that these sport shooters want. We wanted to know where they got their information, and then, of course, we wanted to know their demographic information. So let's take a look at what we found. Well, the first and most important thing is who did we talk to? Who were these non-hunting sport shooters and gun owners? Well, in some ways, not exactly, but getting there, it sort of looked like America. Gender, 59% male, 41% female. We know that there are about 51% females are in the US over 18, but generally a little bit tilted toward males, but not as much as you might think. Mean of 47, 48 years. And then let's take a look at the race and ethnicity of these individuals, because I think this sort of surprised me a little bit. 73% white, 13% Hispanic Latino, 11% Black or African American. And so wow, that's not bad in terms of what that looks like in terms of comparing that to the US population. Hispanic and Latino, I think, is about 18, 19% of the population. Black African American, I think it's about 13.6%. So while there's still, you could say, generally white males, older, yeah, but there's a lot of diversity when it comes to these individuals who own a gun, who are contributing to federal aid, or go sport shooting. Residency, again, a nice mix, 26% of urban, 30% suburban, 20% small town, and 16% from a rural area. So in some ways, you really can say that the overall population of non-hunting sports shooters and firearm owners is diverse. So we looked at that whole idea of demographics, and we just talked about that in terms of age, gender, race. But I also want to sort of open up in terms of who are these people that are contributing, because again, it's a really diverse group of people, and it's one of the things I want to leave you with. First off, there's people who own a firearm, but they don't shoot it. And believe it or not, there's about 16% of the people who have a firearm who aren't shooting it. Wow. They've got a firearm in their bedside table. They're not shooting it. They bought that. They bought it last year. They bought it 6 months ago, but they haven't shot it. They're still contributing because they bought that firearm. They bought some ammo. We have sport shooters who are only going once a year or so, if that, once or twice every 2 or 3 years. We've got people who are going multiple times. And then we actually have people who are going sport shooting but don't own a firearm. So when you think about this group of people that we want to sort of increase support for and shore up the support for the federal aid and wildlife restoration funds, just think about them in sort of this non-monolithic group, that there's a lot of people who look a lot like America, and there's a lot of people who are going from no activity to high levels of avidity. So let's get into the real meat of this thing, and that is do they know who we are from a Fish and Wildlife Agency perspective? And do they know what we do? Well, yeah, not really. Each of these is an individual question. Each of these was randomized. Nobody got them in this order. I'm just putting it because I'm just going from high to low. But we asked these non-hunting sport shooters and firearms owners, well, before this survey, did you know that your state Fish and Wildlife Agency builds and maintains public shooting ranges? And less than a quarter, only 24% of these people who are contributing even knew that agencies were building and maintaining public shooting ranges. At the higher end, a little bit less than half, 45%, said that they're aware that the agencies were restoring fish and wildlife species that are in trouble. And then on down, providing public lands for hunting and fishing and wildlife watching, providing educational programs to introduce people to hunting, providing educational programs to introduce people to recreational shooting, and then again, down the list. So people could say a lot of those things. But again, look at that, 24% know that we're building and maintaining shooting ranges. 75% did not. Well, how important are some of the things that are generally conservation or environmentally oriented in terms of the importance to these folks? Do they care? Do they not care? Specifically, what issues do they care about more than others? It was no surprise to me about clean water. Upwards of 90% of these non-hunting sport shooters and gun owners said that it was important that the government agencies spend time and money on clean water. I can tell you from 35 years of doing survey research, clean water is always at the top. When people talk about climate or this or that, clean water trumps everything, and it has for 25 or 30 years. But look what's next, wildlife conservation at 89%. So certainly within the margin of error, at least in a total, when you look at moderately and strongly agree. So upwards of 9 out of 10 sports shooters, clean water is important, wildlife conservation is important. And then other ones that are important for sure, but are less important, from clean air, outdoor recreation, and public land. So again, we're sort of getting a feel now for what these folks think. Now, just as an aside, we do a lot of work with the state agencies in terms of public in general on how they value different aspects of wildlife conservation, of environmental issues. And this actually ranks pretty darn close. So it's not a whole lot different from what the general population thinks. And now getting to the meat of this. And what we did is we wanted to test awareness, what they knew, what they thought, moving down to levels of support. So these questions were asked in that specific order as we go along. So I'm going to show you this just so you know what you're looking at is when I show you these next numbers, this is what preceded it. We said that in the United States, a special federal tax applies to all sporting, firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. And then we said, did you know about this special tax on firearms, ammo, and archery equipment? And so upwards of only about a third said, yeah, I knew about it. 24% said, yeah, I don't know, maybe I did. Generally, those are people who don't, but don't want to say no, or they heard something sort of in the distant past. And then 40% just said, no, I didn't know about the tax at all. So I feel very comfortable with saying only about a third of these folks who are contributing even knew about the tax. So I am one of those people that I really like don't knows and I like maybes. I think it's a big mistake when survey researchers force people into answers because you're forcing them into directions that they don't want to go. Literally a couple of days ago when I was working on this presentation, I am part of a panel at Harvard on political stuff. And one of their questions was they said, it was sort of this whole idea of sense of place and stuff. And it was interesting. They said in their survey, it was a telephone survey, and they said, would you say most of your neighbors lean left, right, blah, 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 something like that. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. I ate burgers with the guy last night. I know all about his wife and his kids and what he likes to do. I don't know. Well, what would you say? Do you think there? I said, I don't know. She said, well, I can only answer it, leans left, leans right, and I said, I don't know. And she said, well, I'll just put you down for leans left. And I was like, yeah. So anyway, so I like the don't knows because people don't know things and people, have neither agree or disagree. So anyways, so the next part, we felt very comfortable as a group that we had to give them some information. This is after they said, do they know about it? And we said, well, the tax on firearms, ammo, and archery equipment is collected for the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Program, which was established by the Pittman-Robertson Act of 1937. Under this federal law, the special tax are dedicated to wildlife conservation projects, such as acquiring and managing public land, wildlife habitat improvement, hunter ed, and shooting ranges. Most of the funds are distributed directly to the individual state fish and wildlife agencies through grants to use for these projects. And so then after we gave them more information, we said, well, have you heard of it? Even giving them information, specific information, almost half said, no, I've just never heard of that. And 25% said, yeah, I've heard of it. And then again, the 26% said, yeah, maybe I've heard something about it. And I think that's fair, that maybe they've heard something in the distant past. So then we said, well, before the survey, did you know about the special federal taxes collected through this program or distributed directly to the state fish and wildlife agencies to help fund their work? And you can see that number starting to drop. 17% said, yeah, I knew about the taxes and how it went to the agencies, where upwards of 3/4 of the folks did not. And then the big question, and that is that after we tested awareness and then we asked them about certain things, about supporting different aspects of it. And then always after that we gave them that information, we tried to be as unbiased as we could in terms of the neutrality of giving them information about the program because we had to, because they didn't know about it. Most of them didn't. We said, well, now that you know at least a little more about this program in general, do you support or oppose the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Program? So what do you think? Because I've got to say, I was thinking this was going to be in the range of maybe 30 or 40% support. Usually, I've been doing this long enough that I'm pretty close to knowing how things are going to come out. In this case, I was pretty blown away. Upwards of 86% of these non-hunting sport shooters and firearms owners said that they either strongly supported or moderately supported federal aid, and 3% opposed it. I mean, I kept looking at that for a couple of weeks before we released it to the committee. It's just like this, wow, check the numbers again, double check this. Is there anything here? Is there anything there? Is there sample issues here? And we didn't see anything. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but wow. Now, when you look at it and this is what I call a super graph. And when you start looking below the surface, a little bit sort of starts showing up, but not as much as a lot of other studies we do. But basically what this is this is the percent of each of those groups that supported the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Program. So the hatch here, this 85, this is the 86% of everybody who supports the program. And you can go up to the top, people who live in the South, target shooters who are going one day and it sort of progresses 2 days down, support it, a little bit more strongly. Probably would be statistically significant from that top to the overall, but not big sways in numbers like we see sometimes when we look below the surface on some of this stuff. Down to some things like Hispanics, Latinos, Black or African Americans. Again, very high levels of support, just not as high as that overall number. One of the things that I really don't have time to talk about that was really interesting is we kept seeing this group, the group that once you slice and dice it, that use social media rarely or never. I don't know, they were a different group and they were always on the bottom on things or on the top in terms of opposition or something. I'm not sure what to make of that. No value judgments or anything, but it was quite interesting to see that was a pretty important variable that kept showing up here and there. So anyways, so that's sort of that. The other thing that I talked to you about in the beginning in methodology, I know we have people from across the US here. It's like, well, that's nationally, but Mark, what about our region? And again, we just didn't see any huge swings in regional variation as well. And so we can certainly give you numbers. These numbers are in the final report that if you're in the West, you're good. If you're in the Midwest, you're good. If you're in the Northeast, you're good. If you're in the Southeast, you're good. Just not a lot of variations sort of around. And you saw the demographics, the regional stuff. We kept looking at the data. One of the things that you'll hear here and there is that people answer things differently if it's online, if it's phone, if it's personal in-person interviews. That was not the case here in any way, shape, or form, because I'm showing you this because a couple people asked, well, is any different here, any different there? But what was interesting is that people on the phone actually actually went against what people say, that people have more acquiescence bias on the phone than online. And so there's a lot we can talk about that. I don't want to talk too much about methodology. But again, every single way that we sliced and diced this data, we came out with very strong levels of support. So now that we know that, where do they think this money should be spent? Should it be spent on establishing shooting ranges? And we asked, again, each of these is an individual question, and I just put that up from high to low, and they were randomized, so everybody didn't get them asked in the same manner. The one that you would think, if that money is coming from them, to establish and develop shooting ranges was not the highest priority in any way, shape, or form. You can see that 41% strongly agreed on that versus 67% on providing hunter education and firearm safety. And look at this, protecting and improving habitat at 58%. And these are strongly. Take it over to the light green, and you've got 58 and 28 added up, which is strongly and moderately. So very high levels of support for almost all the things that agencies are doing at the top tiers. So again, very, very encouraging. And look at this, something that's completely not in their exact self-interest is this whole idea of reintroducing species that have now have low populations or non-existent in areas where they once naturally occurred. And this is interesting. For me, I noticed this one because we were doing another study right after this. We do a lot of work for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and we did a study for them on the reintroduction of the American marten. Penn State had done another study, and the numbers were almost exactly the same. It was upwards of 90% of Pennsylvania residents supported that. And so again, you see this number here, upwards of 90% strongly or moderately supporting that. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing and pretty encouraging in terms of their attitudes toward wildlife in general and what it is the state fish and wildlife agencies are doing. Well, we've got this information now, and we didn't know how it was going to turn out. But what we did want to do is, how do you get this information to people? What are some of the messages that resonate among these non-hunting sport shooters and gun owners? Again, sort of in some ways, sort of anticipating that we weren't going to get such high numbers. So the question is what specific messages would resonate to either maintain or increase their support for the federal aid program? And so one of the questions we had is, well, a lot of times gun owners, shooters are sort of, looked at as, they feel sort of embattled, if you will. And so we said, well, given that your purchases of firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment help support state wildlife conservation efforts, do you agree or disagree that knowing this has a positive impact on how you see yourself as a recreational shooter or firearm owner? And again, you can see just very high levels of support. And again, I almost interpreted this. You can interpret it any way that you want as well. You can see the data as much as I can in terms of the totality. But the impression that I got in listening to interviews and reading the mail stuff, reading the web-based studies, reading the text surveys that we got, that the shooters, gun owners felt and feel beat up on. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, I'm helping wildlife conservation. That makes me feel pretty good. And so pretty, again, surprising numbers there. So then we followed that up with, again, some very specific messages. Well, what if it's wildlife conservation that you're helping with? How about that you're ethically obligated to contribute to wildlife conservation? Or you're concerned about the future of funding? Yeah. But look at that top one, that upwards of 86%, almost 9 out of 10, just regular gun owners, people who go shooting once a year, or avids, are just simply proud to support wildlife conservation efforts. And at some point, I'm sure next year, we're going to be doing some nationwide surveys on hunters. And I'm going to run this with hunters too, because I'd love to compare that, because I bet it's not a whole lot different. So again, all of a sudden, we've got so much, pardon the pun, but ammo in terms of how to approach this. And then finally, we want to know, well, how do you get them information? What are these folks doing? Again, this is not the general population, sort of looking like the general population, but how do you get to these non-hunting sport shooters and gun owners? Well, probably to no one's surprise, they're getting their information online. They're talking with others, and then on down the list: TV, printed material, podcasts, and radio. This makes me feel really good here. I've done a couple of radio interviews and podcasts in the past couple of weeks. I need to be going online more and talk to others. I don't know. But then when we ask about social media sites of the non-hunters who used social media, where are they getting their information? Again, looks a lot like other studies of Americans as a whole: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, X, formerly known as Twitter, Snapchat, and LinkedIn, and on down the line. So blah, blah, blah. Mark, what did we learn? Give me the big parts of it. Well, we learned a lot. We learned that relatively few non-hunting sport shooters and firearm owners are aware that state fish and wildlife agencies build and maintain public shooting ranges. We saw about that low knowledge levels of federal aid and wildlife restoration program. But you saw in living color that once they learned about it, they overwhelmingly support it. The considerable support for federal aid among non-hunting sport shooters and firearm owners does not appear to be based purely on self-interest. I think that was it was a surprising finding as well. Next, wildlife conservation is an issue that virtually everyone cares about, hunters and non-hunters alike, including non-hunting sport shooters and firearm owners. We saw it in this study, and we've seen it in studies that we've done on the Restoring America's Wildlife Act. We've seen it in a number of studies when you look just at how the population thinks about wildlife. And a lot of you have heard me say that over the years. Oh, Mark says people care about wildlife. Anybody can say anything in a survey. Well, yeah, I guess they could, but let's compare that to things like ballot initiatives and referenda. And in our work, when we go back and we look at wildlife initiatives, green initiatives, environmental initiatives that go to ballot in states that have ballot initiatives or referenda, upwards of 3/4 of those initiatives pass. 3/4. So people say they care, and they're voting with their money and their mouth. And then finally, an effective messaging strategy will be to emphasize and build on non-hunting sport shooters and firearm owners' pride in supporting wildlife conservation efforts. So that's sort of it. I can't wait to hear some opinions and comments and stuff, but there's really a story here, and I can stop sharing. There's a real story here, as you can see. I mean, it was pretty linear in a lot of ways. It surprised me because as I said, I've been worried about this for literally since 2009 and getting more and more concerned over the years as that imbalance between contributors, skewed more and more to the direction of non-hunters. But we know, who they are now. We know where they live. We know what their attitudes and values are. We know that they don't know a lot, but they know they support what it is that we're doing, and we know how to get to them. So, I'm really glad that what upwards of 70 people care about enough to give me an hour of your time, because it's pretty darn exciting. So I was a keynote speaker last week at the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation annual meeting. And I told it that I thought was a joke, but nobody laughed at it. So I don't know if they thought it was a joke. So I'm going to tell you sort of what I think would want to smile at. But, my concern moving now from a research end to a policy end is to scare off anybody who wants to raid that federal aid and wildlife restoration fund. Because you don't want to have 46 million pissed off sports shooters and gun owners at you. So you can smile at that. And so they didn't then. Maybe they didn't think it was funny, but in all seriousness, wow, what a nice first effort at protecting that fund that has done so much, and that all of us have grown up with, and has brought back so many species and protected so much habitat. So anyways, thanks a bazillion for listening, and I'd love to answer questions or just open it up for comments. So thank you. Thanks, Brian, for allowing us to work with you on it, and thanks, Swanny, for getting this together and having so many people care about this issue.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. That was excellent. And, thank you to Seafoot too, because this is knowledge that we wouldn't have without them leading the charge here. So we do have some questions, and I have some questions of my own. I smiled a little bit at your recycle joke. I think it needs some work, but we're going to get there. So, Brian, this one's for you, just to kick it off, and then we'll get into some of the questions here. And to remind people, the Q&A is open, so please drop your questions in there. We've got about 75 folks on here. Part of what we do at the Council to Advance Hunting and the Shooting Sports is try to get this information out to everybody. And so we host a lot of webinars. This is one that we just wanted to advertise to the R3 community. We didn't push it out too far and wide because we did want to allow for the opportunity for questions. So please take advantage of that and throw them down there in the Q&A, and we'll get to those. But since I'm moderating, I'm going to start off with my own question here. Brian, what the most impactful thing from this study, which there were a number that had an impact on me, but was that 24% of these non-hunting sports shooters and firearms owners knew that agencies build and maintain shooting ranges. So, we've got 76% of people out there that have no idea that state fish and wildlife agencies, the ones that do, are engaged in building and maintaining these ranges. Is that something from an agency perspective where you see opportunity to increase that knowledge or have a desire to? And do you know of states in the Southeast that are going to take this and run with this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Swanny, and I would say absolutely. I would say, members of the broader general public, but specifically folks that own a firearm and are out recreational shooting, we obviously have a large percentage who we haven't communicated with very effectively, or haven't gotten the word out to about opportunities, or maybe they're using these facilities that we have, many of our states, and they're just not aware that we're the agencies behind those opportunities. And so it presents a great opportunity for us, to heighten our efforts, both to communicate about the opportunities, but also to communicate, hey, we're able to do this because of your participation, and then also because of the folks who are buying hunting and fishing licenses out there in all of our states, whatever our funding models are. That is key funding to help us to be able to do this, to get those federal grants. So yeah, it's definitely actionable information for us. And as we try to increase capacity, build more ranges, partner with private ranges to offer public opportunities in some cases, we all need to do a better job getting the word out to these folks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. Mark, this next one's for you. A question coming in the Q&A. Was the study weighted for participants in states that don't have public shooting ranges, for example, Minnesota?
No. We wouldn't have weighted on anything like that. Now, what we could do is we could certainly do some cross tabulations. You could easily cross tabulate this in states that do and states that don't, and take a look at it. But there would be no reason to to weight on that. When you're weighting, let's say you do a general population study and you get 53% women. Well, we know it's about 51% women if it was a general population nationwide, so you would weight down or that. But in this case, there would be no reason to do that. But it's a great way to cross tabulate. So yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's an interesting question and something that I hadn't thought of. Another one for you about the methodology really quick is, did the question about state fish and wildlife agencies refer to the agencies with a general term, or was the survey customized with the specific name of that agency in that respondent state?
Was customized.
Oh, okay.
Yep. That's the beauty of that. You can insert Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, blah, 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 blah. We do
Great.
that almost all the time now, so we have that down.
All
It's
right.
helpful,
moving
although
on
we
down there.
find, Swanee, to that point, in not universally, it's definitely helpful to be particular or specific when you can. But as you know, many of our constituents don't know our agencies. They don't know our name per se. And so having both, the name of the agency and then the context, hey, it's wildlife or it's fish and wildlife, that helps for those who don't know the agency by heart or by name.
Absolutely.
It was given to them both ways, generically and if they did not know what that specific agency was. So we have that list, and that's all coded in there.
Okay. Another quick one. This did not include archery, target archers, correct? It's just arms.
We did not, yeah, great question. We did not filter to them. This was gun owners. Yeah. So
Okay.
We did ask,
I
there are
might
questions in there which Mark can get into. There are questions related to archery participation among recreational target shooters
yeah.
with a firearm or gun owners. But yeah, to Mark's point, yeah, it was not filtered down or screened to include specifically archery users.
Okay. Great. Coming in, Jeff Rollinson's got a question about, there was a slide in there that it appeared that it was a question after federal aid had already been explained. And he said, could the results in that last slide on support for conservation be impacted by previous questions and explaining what federal aid was developed for? So that high
The overall support.
yeah,
Yeah, of
high
course, of
support for
course.
conservation.
I don't know if it was impacted, but you can do one of two things. You can just ask. You could start out by asking people, "Do you support this?" and be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" So of course it was impacted, but you can read the language in terms of what we and the committee came up with in terms of that we were just telling them what it is. I mean, if somebody called you or emailed you or you did an interview on, I don't know, something, I don't know anything about nuclear power, you'd be like, well, hell if I know. But if they said, well, there's a program that does this, this, and this, that's obviously where you want people to know that. You want people to be reacting to something they know about. But that's why we asked the awareness questions first. We sort of went down, took steps down to that in a continuum leading up to that. Because if you didn't, if you talk to, well, you can see the numbers. Nobody would answer. They'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So in some cases, you have to give information about what it is you're talking about in the program. So.
Absolutely. Jennifer Wisniewski did want you to know that she laughed at your joke. So,
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. One person, 1 out of 70.
and
I'll buy
then
you a beer next time.
we've got quite a few questions rolling in here. So the next one is, how should Congress ensure that the interest of sport shooters are recognized in terms of state expenditures of PR dollars? That's a big one.
Well, certainly one way we can do that is, from our agencies and our industry partners and research partners to directly communicate that. We want to get this information out very widely, but as we're building communication pieces for awareness and advocacy, we need to include key information like this and public support, as Mark mentioned, for wildlife conservation in general, as well as for providing opportunities for shooting, sport shooters and the latent sport shooters, the folks who are not actively shooting, but that need safety training and need a place to go and practice and develop proficiency. So I think it's incumbent on us to build this into our targeted communication efforts with policymakers.
Yeah, what a great point. And I agree completely. I mean, I would love to get the word out enough that if anybody was thinking about a raid or a diversion of these funds, for them to immediately go to either something they heard from us or from a colleague to say, don't touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. It's a no-win situation for you. Just leave it be and go somewhere else. Again, there's research. It's important. We did this. There's research and there's policy. And we did the research, and now we're moving into the policy situation. And that policy really is don't touch this. Let's get this information out. If you're looking for funds for gun control or mental health related to firearms or whatever it may be, federal aid and wildlife restoration is not the place to do that.
Jennifer's got another question here. The communications campaigns, are they going to be run in pilot states? Is that part of this project? Do we know when that's going to happen?
It's happening as we speak in terms of being developed, and that is in Tennessee and in Texas. So maybe the next webinar next year sometime will be on that campaign.
Okay. And what's the timeline?
Swanny, if you don't mind me interjecting, as most folks probably who are on the call are aware, we often in these grants don't have capacity to do a nationwide communications or marketing type of an effort. Just the cost is too exorbitant and there are limited grant funds available. But what we can do often is to do a pilot test like we're doing here. We're going to take the information we learned from the research, pilot test it in a couple of states, and then kind of set the stage for, okay, what's effective, what's moving the needle, and then what can we replicate or hone in on regionally or nationwide going forward. And that was what we wanted to do here, is get the essential information through the research in hand, and then pilot test using that research, those findings, and then based on the results from the pilot test, kind of know how effective we were, what can we tweak going forward, and then expand out, replicate going forward.
Perfect.
Great. Justin McGuire in Missouri is, I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question, but you may have either one of you might have some insight. He says that Facebook is a primary source for information, but he wants to know where on Facebook people are getting their info. For example, activity-specific groups, agency or nonprofit pages, commercial vendor pages. These questions, he says, might be peripheral to the point of the study, but it would be helpful to know the answers. And it sounds like some of these pilot communications campaigns might get at that.
Yeah, we only went so far because, again, you never know. This is why I guess I will always have a job, and have had a job now for 35 years doing this. Is you find things out and you're like, well, I didn't know that. Well, what about this? And then what about that? So I do think that it's a great question, but we don't have the answer to that in this study. But we do have some other studies that we certainly could go into more in depth on. And I will put that in the back of my mind as we start to do some of these studies next year that we've been contracted to do, to maybe go a little bit deeper. That's a hard one because it's so, I mean, he's making a great point. It's like, well, Facebook, well, yeah, but where? And so I think that needs to be looked at in a little bit more depth in terms of where people are. Is it just with friends and family, or are there specific sites within Facebook that they're using and getting their information from?
Yeah, all great research should recommend further research. Is that right, Mark?
I don't know. It always begets more research, that's for sure. Again, this one was one where I was really surprised at the results, I have to say.
They're pretty telling, and some interesting things in there. So we've got another question here. Did you ask them what else they might want their money to go to, if not wildlife or outdoor recreation?
In terms of like an open-ended, we did not. We had 5 or 6, 7 defined areas that the agencies are spending money on, but I think that's pretty cool to see where they would support it. The issue is federal aid. I mean, I think at some point it was survey was a lot of work to get to where we wanted to be. Our first survey was like an hour and a half long, so we were like, yeah, we probably can't keep anybody on for an hour and a half. But we looked at that, and it was just there's certain parameters that federal aid money can be spent on. So we really didn't want to get outside those boundaries because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, we were talking about the approval of of spending on conservation, but then the desires of where they'd like to see that money spent. And when you included strongly and moderately support, that it was 78% of people supported establishing shooting ranges with those dollars, I believe, which is still a very high percentage while it wasn't the top. And then you look, if you start to read through the study, you see that 64% of these shooters wanted to shoot more at a range. You see that 72% are shooting handguns, and then it looks like existing range use is split between outdoor ranges and indoor ranges, almost evenly split. I think it was 40 something percent, 50 something percent. But Brian, as you think about those numbers and maybe other states consider those, have you heard any conversations about the potential for PR funded indoor ranges? The only one that I'm personally aware of is in North Carolina.
Yeah, likewise. That's the only one that comes to mind for me as well, Swanee. And I think, for a lot of reasons, one is quality of life, noise, concerns or pollution, and just the difficulty of siting ranges, locating ranges in our increasingly, urbanized and developed landscape. I think we're all going to have to look at that more in our planning, in our strategic planning for range development and offering. But yeah, we have had some discussions here internally as we're doing some agency strategic planning about shooting ranges and providing opportunities going forward. So yeah, I think we'll all increasingly give focus to that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, and I'm really glad to hear you say that, Brian, because in our studies for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, I mean, handguns at indoor ranges are the ones where these people are going. And so again, I know it's a heck of a lot harder to build indoor ranges than outdoor ranges, but if anybody is interested, between this study and all the questions that I didn't even present the data to on shooting ranges, combined with the work that we do for National Shooting Sports Foundation on the growth of sports shooting, where these folks are going, where these new people are going, is pretty exciting. And I sort of want to add on to that because there's something that's kind of interesting with this is, look who those new people are. Look who those new sports shooters are. Those are the very people that the relevancy people are trying to get to. We do a number of studies on agency relevancy, and my opinion is that agency relevancy and R3 are basically two sides of the same coin. I mean, we've got people doing the relevancy stuff, people doing the R3 stuff. They're happening at the same time, and they're important for the same reason: changing demographics, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's pretty interesting to see who is buying firearms now, who are sports shooting, and looking at that from an agency relevancy standpoint. So I just throw that out. Not completely. I'm not saying but I'm just saying if you want an in, you go where people are. No different than relevancy as it relates to urban fishing programs and reaching people who might not normally fish and who haven't been traditional audiences of Fish and Wildlife agencies.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge opportunity with sport shooters for agencies to tap into a completely different audience from urban backgrounds, younger, demographically diverse in a number of metrics that we commonly look at. Got another question here. Do you have any thoughts about what percent of these shooters bought a firearm for self-defense, home protection reasons versus recreational target shooting competitive? And Mark, I know you've got data on that in other studies. Was there anything in this study? And if not, can you share something from previous studies?
Yeah, we didn't ask it in this one. Again, that was a question that sort of got cut because we wanted to get to the heart. I can provide those numbers to that person, and maybe we can get a link to we do an executive summary or something of that. But I can tell you that the majority of new people are buying firearms for self-defense. Yes. I can't give you a number off the top of my head, but I can tell you that without a doubt is the number one issue at this point.
I think I know where you can find it. If you go to the council website and you go to the National R3 Symposium page and you look for the 2023 presentations, we had Joe Bartosi do a great presentation, and it had the motivations for purchasing and participating in there, much of which was responsive management data. So you can find that PowerPoint out there, and I can certainly share it afterwards with you. Olivia Wilkes has a question for us. Were there any questions asked in the surveys about shooters' opinions on PR funds being directed away from conservation to other purposes like mental health initiatives, things like that, that some people have proposed?
We didn't, and we didn't because we didn't know that we were going to get this high level of support anyways. We know a lot more now than we did. We played with questions like that, but we wanted to take it one step at a time to see if there was even support at that point. I think that's the next stage of this. So we didn't. But it would be interesting. We've done that with hunters before, but it's been probably 20 years or so. With hunters. We did it with sports shooters too, but that was, I mean, we're talking 2001 data where people overwhelmingly rejected that, as well as anglers with Wallet Bro, sport fish restoration.
Jennifer has reminded me that I forgot about an indoor range. It's in my home state, Georgia Southern University, partnered. It is 100% PR funded, and it's down there on the college campus. Actually, they do a bunch of programs. We've partnered previously with them on Georgia R3 programming. I apologize to Georgia Southern. Don't know how I forget about you. But so there are a couple of examples of indoor funded PR ranges. I'd love to see some more. I've had conversations about this with the Northeastern directors because, Brian, as you mentioned, they are, you want to talk about space limited and growing populations. That's the definition of the Northeast. And the common feedback is we can't find the places to build these ranges, but indoor might be an option. And there's even examples of indoor skeet fields and other things out there on the private side that I'd love to see investigated. And I know some states are having those conversations. So pretty exciting stuff. I think we're going to go ahead and take it and wrap it up here. I really appreciate the time from both you, Mark, and Brian, of course, you and the rest of the CFO committee. We're hoping that Justin Grider kicks his COVID quickly, and I was with him yesterday, so I hope I do not have it. But do you have any last things that you want to share, Mark or Brian?
I'd be glad to send you the PDF of the PowerPoint. That sometimes our reports can get a little thick and detailed. And if people don't want that, or if they want to share that with the directors or people who don't want to hear all of the other stuff, that we'd be glad to put it into a PDF that you could email it around and stuff. So, and then the other thing is maybe we can also give you, or if people want any of those papers, sort of the predecessor to this, the wildlife professional article or the human dimensions article on the precarious position of wildlife conservation funding. We can get to those in PDFs as well.
Yeah, thank you, Swanny. I would just say thanks for hosting to the council, and also thanks to responsive management and to the council for partnering on this project. Also, do want to give a word of thanks to both all of our CFWA R3 committee members and the members of the grant subcommittee, which Jennifer chaired for us previously in her role with TWRA, and Justin for his stepping up and taking increasing leadership in our committee. But all these partners, we do everything, in partnerships, and so much more capacity and expertise when we pool our resources, and this is a great example of that. And so I look forward to getting these data, these results out to larger groups in our industry and across our states. And thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Mark. And thank you for everybody jumping on here. We are going to share the PDF of the PowerPoint slides. As Mark mentioned, there's going to be a recording of this webinar that will be shared on the community as well. And the report is on the National R3 Clearinghouse. The community and the clearinghouse can be found at cahss.org. Top right corner, there's hot links that go to both of those resources. So please jump on there. We're excited to share of this. None of this would be possible without the Multi-State Conservation Grant Program, this webinar, or this project. So we really appreciate the support of those individuals that award that and the funds themselves. With that, we're going to call it. So I hope everybody has a great day.